Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Hyperproof today for our live webinar and Hyperproof demo. My name is Jingsong Zhao, and I'm your host today. I'm really glad you're here spending time with us, and we want to make sure this time is really valuable for you. Before we head into the presentation, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, this presentation is being recorded, so you don't need to take notes. You can access it anytime after the live presentation with the same link you'd use to register for the webinar. Second, and this is really what we always want to do, is make sure that you're getting value from the presentation. So whenever you have any questions as you hear something, please just type your question into the chat box. We have time dedicated at 2 points today to answer questions live with our speaker and presenter and demoer. And with that, I want to welcome you, and I want to introduce everybody to our presenter, Marco Sicardo, who is a Director of Solutions Architecture at Hyperproof. Marco, thank you for joining us today, and would you like to share a little bit more about yourself and what the audience will be hearing about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be showing you Hyperproof today. Before we get into the solution, which I think is very exciting to see all of the mechanics of how it works, we're going to talk a little bit about the background of the space and really a bit of the reason why Hyperproof exists. Part of that is the philosophy around how we've architected our solution. And part of that is our process of observing the market and how we built the solution to respond to the needs of folks probably like yourselves that are living and breathing the compliance experience on a daily basis. So with that, JC, I'm going to jump into the slides and we can kick things off.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So I'll just ask for confirmation. JC, can you see the first slide?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Once again, Marco Sicardo, Director of Solutions Architecture. I'm based here in Seattle, Washington. We have a rare sunny day behind us today, so I'm thrilled about that. A lot of exciting things to show you as well. So as we kick things off, let's start a little bit with the state of the market. I'm not going to read this slide to you because likely it's some of the pain and some of the experience that you live and breathe all the time. Really what I want to focus on is what has been happening in the past 3 years. With an increased dependency on digital infrastructure, we're actually seeing an introspective look at the way companies interpret their own compliance risks and really the state of their actions and their liabilities. There's 2 themes that seem to be coming up pretty consistently as they go through this introspective analysis. The first is that the systems don't appropriately scale the way they would like to. For a lot of organizations, they saw tremendous growth, especially on the tech side, especially on their infrastructure side. And what they find is that the main solution to solving for scalability is adding headcount, building more process. And this isn't always the best way. We can get ahead of ourselves with the amount of process and headcount that we throw at problems. And so the reality is we're looking at our systems, our compliance systems, and wondering, do they scale the way they should be? Additionally, in tandem to that, we're seeing an increase in manual work with about 50% of that compliance and risk work being manual and administrative. And oftentimes what we're seeing as well is that that work is redundant on top of everything. A lot of times we're doing things twice or even 3 times. And so most people in compliance are not administrative assistants. They shouldn't be doing the work of administrative assistants. And so generally we look for some sort of solution to help us solve this problem. On top of all of this, what we're seeing is some specific workflows around risk and compliance that are causing the majority of this bog down. We're seeing things like migrating from one compliance standard to another compliance standard and the redundancies between that workflow, duplicative controls being concurrent to that. On top of that, we're seeing evidence collection being a massive burden for most organizations, having to go through a couple layers of security engineers, having to hunt down the same documents again and again. And the reality is some of our clients, Nutanix comes to mind, prior to using Hyperproof, was spending thousands of hours per year chasing down just specific reports that they were using for evidence. And it really shouldn't be that hard. On top of that, what we want to do is allow compliance teams to shift their focus into the more strategic parts of their work. And whether organizations are leveraging software or not, we're not really seeing that the software is helping promote this vision. A lot of times the software is still running concurrently with manual processes on the side. And we certainly didn't want to do that. We wouldn't be an efficient solution if we were having those processes happening manually. So with that, a great example of some of the problems of scale is the way risk and compliance interact. Many times risk is a bit of an afterthought to the control compliance motion. And oftentimes as companies scale, we see a divergence between the risk team and the compliance team. As they grow, risk becomes its own department, which does make sense as a company scales, but the communication and the collaboration between the two breaks down. Something that we'll talk about throughout our presentation today is the way risk and compliance should be connected at the hip. As you can imagine, controls tell a mitigation story about risks. And so it's important that that data is connected. As you can see from some of these statistics that we have in front of you, there's a tremendous increase in efficiency and effectiveness in overall reduction of compliance issues when those two departments are synergetically working together. But for the most part, we don't see that that's the case. So on top of that, there's a big question that's been arising, and it's a very fresh topic of conversation that we're seeing right now in 2022. When do we implement a risk management strategy, and how do we go about doing so effectively? Historically, most organizations have looked at their compliance posture as this reactive measure. So for example, a small company might be looking to partner with their first big client. This is a really exciting time and it's representative of scale. But that big client's going to say, where's your SOC 2 certification? And 6 to 12 months later, depending on the framework, they might get close to certification and be ready to sign that partnership. Now that represents a tremendous delay. And the reality is that some organizations nowadays are saying, well, if we had enumerated the risks of our business and what we want to do from the get-go, and then created a compliance infrastructure on a basis of those risks, it wouldn't be so reactive. In fact, we'd be a lot more prescriptive and ahead of what our challenges and what our needs are. And so with that in mind, we interweave this connection between risk and compliance and the ability to strategically start with your risks first, with the ability to collaborate. So now, even as you grow, regardless of whether you decide to implement a risk strategy first or a control first strategy, you'll still be able to communicate, collaborate, and get visibility into the work that's being done, because ideally your platform has an operations-minded approach. And that's really one of the things that we focus on that I'll share with you in a moment. So we want it to be agile and scalable and really focus on the compliance operations. And in order to build a compliance operations model, we had to first start with a bit of analysis ourselves. Where do we stand on the maturity spectrum as a prospective company that would want to go and implement a compliance operations strategy? And so this level 1 of the compliance operations maturity spectrum represents a bit of the example that I just described. A reactive organization who wants to be compliant, but they get impacted by the needs of their growth plans, by the needs of their strategy, and then in turn go find the appropriate frameworks that can support them and become compliant. Now, this is a bit of a commonplace condition for most organizations, and it's really why this concept of continuous compliance is a bit of a pie in the sky goal, often a bit of a joke. The reality is that an organization that is continuously compliant is not scrambling ahead of their next audit. They're actually in a good position to tackle that audit and move on to the next strategic task. So level 1 is almost the opposite of being continuously compliant. Level 2 is the middle ground. The reality is that you're still driven by compliance events, but you're building an infrastructure and a strategy in order to make those problems less burdensome, in order to make the audit less of a molasses level slowdown, but something that's a bit more tangible and easier to tackle. And now level 3 is what Hyperproof strives to bring our clients to, a state that is truly continuously compliance. The audit is not a burden. You're preparing for the next thing, and you're in a continual motion where really, if you were audited at any time, you'd be golden and good to go. And that's what we're trying to provide for our clients here. So part of this is the philosophy of Hyperproof, the philosophy of the solution, and we call this the compliance operations model. Now I'll pull up the model here for you to see. You'll note that at the center of the graphic, we have control management. And in order to explain how compliance operations works, it's important that I define to you what a well-managed control actually constitutes. Well, a well-managed control in terms of Hyperproof means a control that's written with great universal language that doesn't just fulfill one framework, but also satisfies the needs of multiple requirements across a multitude of frameworks. Why would you want that? Because it's the most efficient way to operate. It means that you're having less to manage and you're servicing a lot more of your needs in one go. So that well-managed control is going to have that universally written language, ideally under a common control structure. It's going to have automated evidence because a lot of evidence collection should be automated. You should not have to chase down documents. You should be able to leverage technology for that. In addition to that automated evidence, there should be some context and some ability to collaborate on that control so you can get work done and actually understand what work has been done on that control. So now that we've defined that well-managed control, let's pivot into another piece of the compliance journey beyond that control management. Let's pivot into an audit. Your audit comes around. What information do they need? What information do they require? The exact data that lives on that well-managed control. So why wouldn't Hyperproof provide that navigation for you so that when you import your DRL from your auditor, you have that data from the control that is substantiating that audit request? That's what we want, is to navigate that information for you and really create a unifying solution where you're not spending time hunting things down or mapping data points. The solution does it for you. And so there's a similar story about risks. We talked about risks a little bit earlier. The reality is that your controls actually tell a story about how you're presently mitigating a certain portion of your risk. And so most organizations actually have a very disconnected posture between the way they track risks and the way they track controls. But if we can connect those two, which Hyperproof does, just by managing your controls, we can automatically track the way your risks are doing. And that's really one of the core pieces of value of the solution that we'll talk about today. But before we dive into the platform, a few other things that I want to mention that are critical to the compliance operations model. The first being that it needs to be easy to use. Hyperproof conducted over 180 interviews with compliance managers before even starting to build the software. And we continue to conduct those interviews today continually to ensure that we're building a solution that emulates an ideal workflow for compliance managers. On top of that, we want to engage with organizations where they work, and that means playing nice with the tech stacks that they have. We think we've built a great compliance operations solution, but we're not the be-all end-all of software. And so part of that is playing nice with the tech stack that you have. Additionally, we want to create a collaborative environment where not only do you get context on the work that's been done, but you can also continue to communicate and tie in to the different areas of work that you're doing within Hyperproof. And then finally, I want to talk about scalability and automation, two really important parts of compliance operations. With scalability, what that means is that at Hyperproof, a one-person company is using the same software as a multinational. And the reason for that is that we add features on a basis of your needs and your maturity, but the core beating heart of the platform, the way it functions, is the same. What that does for you is that Hyperproof doesn't represent a bog down when you grow. There is no new onboarding or new implementation. You can just continue to use the solution the way you're familiar continually. And then that final point about automation, I like to call this tasteful automation. The reality is that in risk and compliance, there are things that you should absolutely automate, and we'll talk about a multitude of them today. But there are many things that should be a manual review process. And so Hyperproof is cautious not to overly automate the story so that you're in a position where you're not compliant because you didn't actually check a core piece of documentation that you should have in order to pass your audit. So we do our due diligence and we're careful with how we build our features as well. But that's a little bit of the compliance operations model. And the next step is to show you the solution, but I know that we're going to pause for a moment here and do a few questions.
I think you can move ahead. We have not gotten any questions so far, but please, if you have any questions, just type them in and we'd love to do our best to talk about them.
Amazing. And JC, I'll just ask to confirm that the screen is looking all right.
It is. It's good.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to Hyperproof. Where we are right now is my company, Avanti Corporation's Hyperproof instance. There's a lot of information right here at the general overview, and that's by design. There really isn't a lot of places where we can see this aggregate of information. I think about it a little bit like a smartwatch that I can check and know where do we stand, what do we have to worry about, what do we have to work on. And so the first thing that we have at the top of the overview is the programs that we're operating under. This is telling me exactly what frameworks, we use this terminology of programs and frameworks interchangeably. It's telling me what I'm working on. It's also giving me a snapshot into my audits. Hyperproof is used for both internal and external assessments, and so we can see who owns them, whether they're being addressed accordingly. We also get an aggregate view of all of our controls. So I can see whether they're implemented all the way to fresh. Now, if freshness doesn't seem like a familiar terminology to you, that's okay. We did invent that term at Hyperproof in relation to controls. I'll talk a little bit about what freshness is and how it works in a moment. But the quick summary is that it's the general system of hygiene and maintaining controls accordingly within our platform. If you're leveraging the risk register, you're going to get a snapshot, a little cutout of our actual risk dashboard, showing you a bit of a heat map and a bit of the mitigated versus actual risk that you can view right there. Now, something to note about our dashboards, anytime you see a number, you can click on that number and get sent into a pre-filtered report. So by no means are you locked in this broad overview. You can actually drill in and get right to work should you want to. Now, here at the bottom, reuse is a really important part of the design of Hyperproof. It's where we monitor our general efficiency. The control reuse is quite simply the common controls model. How many well-written, universally written controls are being mapped to multiple frameworks and multiple requirements? And so that's what we're tracking there. Labels is one of the most powerful organizational aspects of our entire system. I like to describe it as a bit of a smart folder that you can determine whatever theme of information you want to put in it. So you create a label, access management, for example, and you can put every company policy, every control, every automation, every piece of evidence that relates to that theme. And inside of labels, you can actually search for those types of items. And so once you dump them all in, Hyperproof interlinks them all together. And so simply by putting things into a label, you're actually mapping out things like policies and automations across the platform in a couple of clicks. So I'll show you labels in a minute, but really what labels is going to allow you to do is, as a small team, support a larger organization's compliance posture without having to worry about distributing things like evidence or policies on every control that is related. Now, the Explore tab, anytime you see an Explore tab next to a dashboard, it's our way of customizing that dashboard. So I can go in and drill down by different data points and get a deeper view. If I'm curious what our CISO, Alicia Keys, is working on, I can easily go check that and I can see what she has optics to. A few other quick things to mention. We have this wonderful training tool called WalkMe. WalkMe is really for people like myself who would struggle with a Confluence page of instructions. It's a guided tour in our platform. So anything you want to do within Hyperproof at any time, we give you this guided tour experience, and anything that you create while running through a WalkMe tour, you actually get to keep. So after learning how to instantiate a framework and populate controls, you actually have your first framework and your populated controls, which is pretty awesome. Now, Teams functionality is another unique aspect of Hyperproof. It's what allows us to fishtail a control for different evidence lines. I've actually given you examples here in which you may want to do something like that. But if you wanted to go in and say, you know what, we acquired a company, they're set up on a different infrastructure, but we want their evidence supporting this compliance standard today, rather than needing to have multiple frameworks, we can actually split up those evidence lines and track them in aggregate or separate. So there's a lot to talk about strategically with teams, generally more of an enterprise feature, but powerful nonetheless. Now we're going to jump into my work. This is the task and ticketing engine of Hyperproof. Now, we've talked a lot about collaboration and its importance, but really a lot of collaboration is also delegation. We need to assign the work. We can't let everything in compliance sit in the laps of a few individuals. There's a multitude of control owners in Hyperproof, and we generally want to engage them. And sometimes we want to engage people who aren't control owners outside of the organization. So you'll note that Hyperproof links these tasks and tickets within our platform. We have the ability to assign a task to a non-Hyperproof member. They can even submit evidence over email. But one of the more powerful pieces of functionality within this area that I do want to emphasize is our ability to generate a ticket and have that link to a task and ticketing engine, either by creating a new ticket altogether or linking to an existing ticket, and engaging a technical person, generally a developer, to submit evidence. So developers historically, they live and breathe out of Jira. It's one of the most popular systems. And so I'm going to use Jira for an example today. What we've done here is we've created a ticket, we've linked it to a control, and we've assigned it to a developer in Jira, who in this case is my alter ego in Jira. Now, this developer has asked a question saying, I added evidence, is this okay? They've added the specific evidentiary file. We even have some other folks from the team that have progressed its status, in this case, a manager within Jira. What's neat about this experience is that they're actually controlling Hyperproof through Jira. None of these Jira users have a Hyperproof account, and what they're doing is contributing entirely to the evidentiary workflow. And the reason I can say that with confidence is that actually, if we close this ticket, we'll actually post that evidence automatically to the control. So now that developer has created a workflow that without ever needing Hyperproof, they can puppet the experience, contribute evidence, and be part of the compliance journey, but in a much more frictionless manner. So that is the way we integrate into systems like Jira for tasks and ticketing. Now we're going to pivot over into the program library. Now, you can see some of the frameworks that I'm currently working on here, but what if it's not one of these? All I do is click the New button, and any framework in the world can be instantiated as a new program in Hyperproof. Now, this is really important. As our needs change, as we expand into new opportunities, there are standards and frameworks that are not as common that we may need to actually support as part of our compliance solution. And that's why this portal exists. But for the most part, one of the ways that we add value for our clients is having templates pre-built in our platform. You'll note that we have 55 here. When I joined, there were significantly less, and at Hyperproof, it feels like we're adding a template every few months. There's something new, some nice surprises. But generally, the process is this: if you need a new framework, you need something in the system, let us know. And there's a chance that we can build it out for you pretty quickly. But you can search any of the templates within our library here. Depending on the framework, there might be some variations, like in the case of SOC 2, there are, of course, some trust principles. You would select the ones that are relevant to you in your current state. You click Review. You can expand those. We have illustrative controls in Hyperproof for the majority of our frameworks, and that's really important. Most organizations that are implementing their first framework, they have to go and look through the requirements, design control language. With Hyperproof, we've done a lot of that design for you. You can tailor any one of our controls. They're completely customizable. You can add bolt-ons that relate specifically to your business. Once you've figured out a solution that you like, you click Use this template, and then you're going to have an instantiated framework tile like you see here. One other thing that's really important to mention in the template library is this Jumpstart button. Now, what the Jumpstart button does is it actually sorts all of the frameworks on a basis of how much work is overlapping between what I'm actually working on in Hyperproof and what's out in the library. Now, why is this important? Well, Hyperproof is actually letting you know where you should go next. So if you're undecided between 2 or 3 frameworks and you're saying we have to figure out which one to tackle, well, Hyperproof's going to tell you this one's going to be the lowest lift because about 36% of it is already done. Now, that's the tracking aspect of what we call Jumpstart. If we dive into an actual framework itself, and we're going to jump into SOC 2 here, and we click on the Jumpstart pane, we actually get to see the overlapping percentage, the related requirements, the suggested controls, and the common controls. And all we do is click this slider, and we actually incorporate everything that's overlapping underneath the overlapping requirements. And you may note that I said overlapping requirements. Controls are pretty fluid. You can modify them, you can change them to anything you want. But because we've interlinked all of our templates at the requirement level, you can actually modify controls, make them your own, and we'll still be able to map them using Jumpstart to the next framework that you go to. So a pretty nifty way to tackle duplicative work when you grow from one framework to the next as part of your compliance journey. Just know, a little addendum on that, you're not forced into this binary decision here. You can actually go in control by control if you wanted to and say, you know what, we'll adopt this one, or we won't do that one, we'll write it from scratch. So there is a granular option for you as well. Now, we're inside SOC 2, so let's actually talk about the internals of SOC 2 here and what we're looking at. You'll note that the general overview is structured exactly like the broad overview. Now, this is by design. There's no reason to make it different. We wanted to make it easy to understand. A few other elements, lay of the land here. When you have this lovely pile of faces, this represents the folks that are participating in the domain that you're in. I can see their permissions. I can change their permissions should I want to, but I'm able to easily see who's working in this arena of the platform. Additionally, this logo right here represents what we call the activity feed. Now, Hyperproof's activity feed does 2 things. One is it's a note-taking function within Hyperproof that tells me who did what and when. It gives me context. So before I go ask a question or try and get anything done, I know exactly what happened. It's also the environment in which we collaborate between Hyperproof, so we can message to one another as members of Hyperproof, but we can also message to Slack and integrate directly with Slack bidirectionally, as well as Teams. You'll note the Zoom icon. We can jump on a Zoom call should we want to as well. Now, one of the cool things that we support for those Slack heavy users is this send activity to Slack button, giving you really the ability to manage the actions within a specific framework in a Slack channel should you want to. This is popular when you want to have different leaders across different parts of the organization have optics into the compliance behaviors without actually inviting them into a new system. So you can, of course, leverage that. The Explore tab will look similar to what we saw. The Explore tabs are customizable, so we can determine what data points show up here. But the important thing that I want to call out here is work that needs attention. Work that needs attention is a little bit like an executive assistant that knows who we are, it knows what we're working on, it knows what framework we're in, and calls out any areas of concern. In this case, we have a control that is expired. And so I'm going to click on that control. And this is a good point for us to talk a little bit about freshness. So let's take a look at that. So with freshness, what we're doing is essentially setting up an expiration date on a control, an expiration date that reoccurs automatically, that can be set in bulk across a multitude of controls, or it can be set individually on a control, and you can have variations in what that reoccurrence looks like. Now, freshness was basically co-designed by one of our customers, and the reality is that a lot of the functionality in Hyperproof is co-designed or inspired from the problems that our customers have. In this case, we were working with Primate Consulting, a popular MSSP in the Washington area that was servicing 36 different companies' control compliance in a giant spreadsheet. And Carl Lombardi, the VP over there, was stack ranking the controls in an expiration date column and notifying the respective control owners at those companies that they needed to revise those respective controls. So if that sounds highly unscalable, you'd be correct. But what was interesting in talking to Carl is that his clients loved the experience because it wasn't a report coming once a month saying, 300 of your controls have issues, go figure it out. He was reaching out to the actual control owners and by design, delegating the work to the people that could fix it. And so that's what we built with Freshness. We built this system that would notify the control owners so we could maintain good hygiene with Hyperproof automatically. So I can easily go in, because this control is assigned to me, and hopefully your notes are better than mine, and I can say I checked this, and we'll click save, and it is now healthy again. So if there was ever a problem, we'd be able to go back and take a look and see what's going on. Another important thing to mention, we talked about the activity feed and the face pile, is this button here. Anytime we see this button, we have the access to the task engine of Hyperproof. And you'll note that it automatically links to the area of the platform you're in. This is allowing us to assign a task. We can even assign that task directly in a Jira, as you saw earlier, but we're now connected to the actual control. So any work that gets done, any evidence or policies that get submitted, they automatically get mapped to the correct place once that ticket is completed. So important to note that we have access to tasks throughout the system. So now that we've talked a little bit about the structure of the control, one other thing that I want to mention here is our ability to map the common controls model. How many times are we reusing this control language across multiple requirements, if not multiple frameworks, as you can see here? So we make it easy to view that common controls model at the control level as well. Something that I'll allude to here for you is the ability to link risks to our controls and vice versa. So I'm able to, in a control, click the add button and run a search of the topic of this control. Anything that I find after running that search, I just click select all and link. And now I've linked all of the risks that relate to this specific control. But we'll show you how we do this exact workflow in the risk register, as well as the impact that that's going to have. But while we're in this view, I want to talk a little bit about proof. As you can imagine, Hyperproof, we have a strong emphasis on evidence collection and the experience of bringing in evidence into our system. So we'll start with the basics. The first is that we can easily navigate to our own system and pull any evidence that lives on our computer. Additionally, we have the ability to pull evidence from our own platform. Many small to mid-sized companies leverage their cloud infrastructure for parts of their SOC 2 certification, for example. So maybe you have that evidence stored on AWS or Azure, and being able to pull that evidence directly from the vendor is a big convenience factor for us. On top of that, there may be examples of evidence that you do not want to be in Hyperproof. If you're working with a government or a secure cloud, you're able to actually use a hyperlink. That hyperlink is used as evidence, but the evidence is still in its source location. So that's an option as well for you. Now, what about document types, document management? How do we collect evidence from those? So all of the integrations that you see here are native integrations in which we can quite simply access your instance and pull that evidence out into Hyperproof. Basic, but useful. Let's take things up a notch. We offer an automation on all of these, which we call Live Sync. And with Live Sync, what we're able to do is actually create a single source of truth within one of these respective systems and have those source files update all locations in Hyperproof as they get changed. So for example, this is really wonderful for engaging a not as technical team. Think HR that might have an onboarding document that includes some security training. As that document gets updated, it's used as evidence in Hyperproof. But what we do is we get it sent to us one time from SharePoint, for example, with Live Sync turned on. Now, that person on the HR team just maintains it in SharePoint as they normally would. And regardless of whether it's been linked to 25 different parts of Hyperproof, it will update in real time for you. And that's really what Live Sync does. We're trying to fully automate document collection from these types of systems. What I will add on top of that is that the Hyperproof side takes on the responsibility to version that document for you. And when you submit it to an audit, of course, we solidify that single version. It's not going to update under your feet after your audit request gets submitted. But that's a little bit about some of the automation that we provide for documents here. Now we're going to pivot over into a more advanced version of automations, which we call hypersync. So hypersyncs represent automated evidence collection from your tech stack. We're continually adding to this list of solutions. In fact, almost every single sprint that we run has either a new application being built or more depth being built to the existing hypersyncs that we support. So you'll notice a large diversity of solutions here. And if you click can't find what you're looking for, you'll be propelled directly into a Jira ticket that goes to our product team, and we will keep track of the popularity of those requests and build them accordingly. So we really have a built by the people approach when it comes to hypersyncs. Now, how do hypersyncs work? We're actually going to do a one-time setup process. We're going to run a hypersync together. And once this hypersync is operational, it's actually running on its own. So the first thing that we're going to do with AWS is select the service in which we'd want to pull evidence from. Identity and access management is one of the most common ones. Generally, our clients have to go through a couple layers of security engineers to get this information. It's also relatively routine. One of the interesting themes that we discovered was that a lot of our clients were having this evidence rejected when they were taking screenshots of AWS and submitting it to the auditor. So in the design of hypersyncs, we not only wanted to automate the evidence collection, but also make sure that we didn't get that evidence rejected at all. And so we're going to pick an account password policy proof type. We're going to click next. We're collecting that proof automatically. And just for fun, we're going to collect that proof daily because no one in their right mind would collect this proof daily if it was manual, but we can do that when Hyperproof's doing the work for us. So we'll version that document and we will pick the format of a PDF. So I'm going to click next here. Hyperproof automatically builds a naming convention that doesn't stack. Our little wheel is spinning here, and we're actually generating that hypersync as we speak. That green plug means that it worked, we're in operation. So I go into my proof and it's actually been posted. And so this is the format of our automated evidence. Now I mentioned that we wanted to be sure that this evidence didn't get rejected. So the way we went about solving for that is we actually consulted with auditing firms prior to launching this functionality to ensure that the format and the contents included everything that was needed to pass our audits successfully. To date, we haven't had any auditors reject any of our hypersync evidence, so we're proud to report that things are operating smoothly. On top of that, I get a multitude of data on the sidebar of who did the pull, when was it pulled, what date, from what system, is that system currently operating? And then on top of that, any controls that this is mapped to, I'd want to see all of those in one single view. And so we have that here. That's a little bit about hypersyncs. Now I mentioned earlier labels. So labels are that organizational feature in which we can store things like policies, as well as automations, granular types of evidence, and correlate them to controls. So in this case, I have a folder of policy templates, and I have those uploaded into the system. I can also attach any automations that might relate to that category of templates. In this case, it's a broad folder, so we wouldn't have automations associated. But in some of the other labels, I actually have a more specific group, as you can see here. And I can actually go in and say, you know what? I want all of the controls under a very specific framework, in this case, SOC 2, to have these policies associated. Once I have filtered a subset that I like, I click select all and link. And as I mentioned earlier, now we've mapped that policy to all of those different controls in a couple clicks. So this is really where we distribute things in Hyperproof effectively. Now, Hyperproof also supports a proof library. This is really our repository of all of the proof that's been uploaded in the system. We can see the status, we can see when it was uploaded and by whom. We can even search everything that was uploaded by ourselves. So this is an important single source of truth within the platform. Now let's talk about audits and let's go into the audit module. Now, audits in Hyperproof are both for external audits and internal audits. But I'm going to show you an external audit, the SOC 2 audit, just to give you a sense of the types of data and the types of information that we bring to the forefront here. So the first thing I want to mention is within this dashboard, it's very easy to see where we stand. We have a fully customizable timeline that shows what we need to work on and when. We also have the ability to rename these steps. So if I wanted to rename these steps after the members responsible for them, I could do that too. The world is your oyster. I'm also able to see here who owns specific requests, who owns the bulk of the work so that they can get ahead on it. And I can also see if any of the requests are stale or what their overall status is. Perhaps the most emblematic of the ComOps model is the fact that we actually have the data of the controls that relate to the SOC 2 audit shown right in the dashboard. This isn't just a random swath of controls. These are our SOC 2 controls that relate to this audit, and I'm able to see if they're being responded to and well maintained via our freshness. So if that donut was red, probably not in a good position to tackle this audit. We should probably click on the number of expired or unknown controls and go see what's going on there. We have a similar capability with labels if you're leveraging any of the policies or automations to support your requests within Hyperproof. Just a quick reminder, I'm easily able to see who's participating in the audit from the face pile above. Now, our goal in designing the audit module in Hyperproof was to tackle the inefficiency and honestly some of the stress that we see audit season bringing for our clients. I use that metaphor of running through molasses. Just this morning, one of our clients was telling me that he feels like the whole company stops moving for the entire audit period. And that's not something that anybody wants. And so anything we can do to help, we will. So the first thing that we do is make it so that when you import your DRL from your auditor, we scan for the control ID on the request list and actually map the respective controls for you. So you may be wondering earlier how those SOC 2 controls even ended up on this SOC 2 audit. You may have thought that they were manual, but actually that's an automated function. We're mapping the respective controls to the requests because of that scanning function that we have on the control ID. So now, as an internal compliance manager, I'm able to see and actually navigate into the respective controls, easily see if they're healthy, and even pull in any context that I may need to add in the notes field. We do a similar level of navigation work for you when you click Add Proof. When you click Add Proof, we actually find those same controls, and if there's any evidence sitting beneath them, you'll be able to click the Add Proof button if you haven't done so already. In this case, I already did that, and we have our evidence sitting here below. So that manual step there is an example of what I call tasteful automation. The AICPA specific to SOC 2 does not want people populating evidence automatically. They do want a manual check, which is what we did right there. But all of that searching for the documentation, finding out where it lives, who owns it, whether it's being worked on, we do all of that and bring it out for you so that you can monitor the conditions of the associated controls and evidence. That activity log is also very useful because we want to reduce the number of questions that our auditors give us. And so having that level of context is really important, and that's what we do here. Now, one other thing that I want to mention, which is really the second half of the efficiency of what we do here in the audit module, is the ability to invite our auditor into Hyperproof. So we can invite our auditor in. They're in this domain. They're not going to navigate your control posture. They're not going to see the different versions of evidence. They're just going to see this environment that we're in. But the important thing about that is that they're now engaging in the same place that you work. And in fact, we work with some top 50 CPA firms in the country that conduct their entire audit service through Hyperproof. So what we're seeing on average with our clients is about a 3 times faster audit preparedness speed because of the navigation work that we're doing. In fact, one of our customers, Clarifier, is really taking advantage of the efficiency. 3 times faster wasn't enough. They want to do 3 audits in the time that it took them to do 1. And they actually say that it's less stressful to do those 3 audits than that single audit without Hyperproof. So with that in mind, what we're doing is creating a more gamified and more accessible environment so that those audits aren't impacting the organization as much, and we feel comfortable in preparing for them and knowing where we stand and also responding to them. So that is the audit functionality of Hyperproof. Now, I'm really excited to pivot into the risk register as well. I want to talk a little bit about the state of most organizations doing risk activities and building risk registers, and why the risk register looks the way it does, why it was designed the way it is. So first and foremost, we didn't observe a pattern between small companies, mid-size and large, in what they do with risks. We find that even the most mature and developed organizations still use spreadsheets to manage their risk activities. And the reason for that is that there isn't a good history of integration between risk management software and general control management software. And so the best way was to export your controls, if you're leveraging software for control management, export them into a spreadsheet and parallel view them to that spreadsheet of risks. So really broken and archaic process. But why is this behavior so important? As we mentioned at the beginning of the call, it's really important for organizations to understand the relationship between their controls and how they mitigate their respective risks. Because your controls might be how you're securing your systems today. And one of your liabilities may be securing your devices within the organization. And so we want those things to communicate. So it's really important that we have the ability to collaborate in the risk register. We're able to invite different members of the team to work in the risk register together. Within the risk register itself, we can enumerate any types of risks that your organization might have. So the level of customization and granularity that you can have in terms of risk types and the things that you can put in here is limitless. Now, if we click on a risk, you'll note that we have tolerance levels, actual risk, likelihood, and impact. And the tolerance, likelihood, and impact basically determine what the risk is and whether that risk is healthy. Now, those of you that are savvy, or it's even quite obvious, may note that this calculation should not equal a healthy risk. And you may be wondering why. Well, I'll give you that secret in a moment. But the first thing I want to show you is that we're also able to input rationale and explain why we've made the decisions that we have around likelihood and impact. Now I'll answer that question on why this risk is healthy despite the structure. The reason it's healthy is that I've actually connected a control to this risk and determined that 100% of this control's health is mitigating this risk. Now, all you do to add new controls to this specific risk is you run through that exact search function that we saw earlier, mirrored from a control to risks. I'm able to put in as many controls as I like that support the mitigation of this specific risk. And we're even able to modify the mitigation percentage. I'm able to say, you know what? These two risks actually enumerate 50% of the mitigation quotient, and the rest of the associated controls have a smaller percentage. So you can really get specific on how you design your risk register. But at the end of the day, what I said is that this specific control is going to mitigate the entirety of this risk. And that's really important, because then when your leadership team says, hey, what are the liabilities of the business? What are our risks across a 5 to 10 year period on a basis of these projects? You're able to go into the risk register and say, well, you know what? We're doing a pretty good job on a basis of our control posture. You can see the majority of our actual risk is actually green, but we do have a few risks that are moderate that aren't being fully mitigated. And you can click into that report view and actually begin to tell a story around what you're going to do. Sometimes this data is used to say, you know what, we're going to modify our controls slightly to encapsulate some more of that remaining risk. In the conditions that we have in front of us, with 3 being moderate, that could be a very realistic plan. But in certain times, you're going to a new vertical as a company. You might be managing healthcare data all of a sudden, and that implies adding a new framework. Because we have this environment in which we can work together, even as risk teams and compliance teams diverge as companies grow, we're still able to work together. We're still able to transparently share optics across what different sides of the organization are doing. And that's why the risk register has been so widely received by our clients, is that it's just adding a new level of data fluidity between some historically disparate motions. But that is really the risk register. And one final point, since we do have a bit of time, I'll tease out what the vendor management platform is as well. The vendor management platform allows us to categorically assign risks, evidence, and questionnaires that we send out by vendor. So we're able to easily go in and say, you know, these are the proofs associated to Salesforce. These are the controls that relate to our relationship with Salesforce. These are the associated risks. What's cool about this is, as you saw earlier, I'm able to pull that evidence directly from this vendor relationship. Now, in the case of something like AWS, I may assign my vendor contact a ticket to share with me their SOC 2 certification, so I can use a portion of that to substantiate my own SOC 2 posture, my own compliance posture, moreover. And so we're able to launch a ticket directly to the vendor contact. They're able to get us that document, and we're able to use it throughout the platform. So organizationally, the vendor management portal really gives us a lot of help in mapping those types of instances. And our questionnaire functionality allows us to initiate questionnaires to specific vendors. We can store a multitude of questionnaire types, but these questionnaires support conditional logic, so we can run our respondents through a unique workflow. They also support an answer key where we can determine weighting. We all know that we've seen those questionnaires where you answer a question and it says you've done 10% of a 10-question questionnaire. And the reality is we want to actually monitor the actual success of that questionnaire, not necessarily just its completion. And so we're able to say, these 2 questions are worth a lot more. And if you noticed, if you have a scrutinizing eye on that vendor, we have an assessed risk, and we're able to calculate that actual risk on a basis of how they respond to the questionnaire in real time. So pretty amazing functionality within the vendor management portal. Also something that, while we released it recently, has picked up a lot of steam with our clients. But that's really the Hyperproof instance and my demo of Hyperproof for you all today.
Thank you, Marco. That was very thorough. Appreciate it. And for those of you on the line, let's take some open questions. The first question is, you had just shown us several different modules. Are there different ways or just one way to get started with Hyperproof? Do I need all of those modules right away, or can they be, are they sold separately?
Modules as in programs and frameworks, I presume? Or the different modules, like the different assets of the Hyperproof platform?
But the risk, the vendor, the audits, those modules.
That's a great question. So Hyperproof tries to bundle up a really high value portion of our platform. If I may even share my screen again so you can see what I'm referring to, but everything from overview to audits is a single solution. So I'm just going to quickly give you that snapshot because I want to make sure you come away with a good understanding. So overview all the way down to audits is the core platform. And there's a lot in there for our clients. Risk and vendor are additional modules because not every organization wants to manage risk and vendor in the same solution. Sometimes organizations say that they may work on it later. But the reality is, I don't think we've worked with a single company in the past year that hasn't leveraged either one of those or both because of those themes that we talked about at the beginning of the call, where companies are starting to realize that they're going to have less slowdowns in their business procedures if they start thinking about risks a little bit earlier. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks. We have another question. How can someone get started if they're interested in evaluating Hyperproof?
Great question. Anybody that's interested in learning more about Hyperproof, please email us and we'll get you in touch with our business development team, who will get you set up with one of our account executives who can tell you all about the solution, answer any questions you have, and we'll give you all the details on what it's like to run a proof of concept as well.
Yeah, there's a quick, short demo form right on our website that will get you in touch directly with one of our team members to start that conversation.
That's correct.
How is Hyperproof sold? Can you talk about the pricing model a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hyperproof's pricing is actually transparently on our website. So if you're curious about our pricing, we actually put in all the details instead of just some of the details. That's why it's good to walk through the pricing with an account executive, because they can better explain it. But as I mentioned, we have that core platform, that overview to audits, and then the risk and vendor are separate modules. Now, Hyperproof is priced. The way the pricing scales is on a basis of the number of programs or frameworks that you need. So if you're just starting out with SOC 2, it's really as simple as a single framework, and that whole solution is encapsulated there. If you need multiple frameworks, we have scaled pricing. So really what I would recommend is that if you have a vision for your 12, 24, 36-month plan for compliance, and you have an idea of what frameworks are in discussion, just share that with an account executive, and they'll draft up the out the door cost, which is always a reduced rate from what you see on the website, because what we have on the website is the per program cost.
Great. Well, it seems like those are the questions we've seen so far. I don't see additional ones at this time, but like Marco said, we loved, if you have any additional questions or want to talk to us, you could email us or contact us on the website. And with that, I want to thank Marco again for sharing all this great information. And I want to thank you on the line for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it. And please stay in touch or reach out if you have any needs. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.